I'd like to welcome you to another Todd Talk, where we take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. Topic for today's Todd Talk is going to be another tool in your toolbox for working with gifted students. What I'm going to be talking about today is pre-assessment. So far, I've talked about using bulletin boards with challenges on it, using choice boards where kids have choice in what it is they're going to be doing when it comes to their assessment, and also having board games in your classroom that are going to cause students to think cognitively. Pre-assessment is something that is a little more involved in the classroom. In other words, it's not something you just put in the classroom and kids have access to it. It's something that you as the teacher actively do. So the first question we want to answer is, what is pre-assessment? So pre-assessment, as you can see here, the purpose of it is to determine what students already know, understand, and can do. This is really important with gifted kids because not all gifted kids, but there are many gifted kids that will come into your classroom with a wealth of knowledge or understanding or exposure to things that they've already learned about. And you're going to be teaching them something that they may have already heard. Imagine how boring that would be for you or tedious that would be, and that something that you're learning is something that you've already have learned many times over and know more about. And so why make the students, tolerate that? Pre-assessment is given before instruction. That's why it's a pre-assessment. And then also during the initial planning of your lessons. How teachers use the results is kind of the most important thing. I've had teachers that have given pre-assessments to students, and the students will get a perfect on the pre-assessment. And then I'll ask them, well, what did you do with the student? And they said, well, I made them do the lesson. The pre-assessment is telling you the student does not need this particular lesson in the way that you're going to be teaching it. It shows that they already have a great understanding of that. So you have to think differently. So what are you going to do to make it more challenging for the student, or give the student an opportunity to learn something else, or more about what it is, or going deeper into what it is? So how you use these results is you're supposed to guide initial instruction. It could be when grouping. So if you have a group of students that have nailed the pre-assessment, you might put them together and have them work on something. And to differentiate learning experiences. But that's differentiating not just for gaps that students have, but also for abilities that they already possess. So that's something to really consider when you're thinking about pre-assessments. So how the students use the results. They can figure out what they need to learn, what they understand. It may show that they know quite a bit about this topic, but it also might expose some gaps in their learning or misunderstandings of their learning. And so this helps them to kind of shore up their understanding of what it is that they're learning about. And so what does the pre-assessment look like? Here's the thing that I think a lot of people think, that when you give a pre-assessment, it has to be a formal pencil to paper assessment that asks content level questions. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. It could be a product that a student produces. It could be a conversation that you had. It could be very informal. So you're talking to the student and they express, they're saying, I see that we're doing this unit coming up. I'm really excited about that. I watch, this show all the time, that I've learned about that. I learned about that at a summer camp. So just having these conversations and getting to know your students. So what kind of pre-assessments do you give your students? The answer is there's lots of choices. So there is no one way to do this, but there's three schools of thought of how you can gather this information. The first one is through a formal pre-assessment, where you have students sit down and either take an assessment that contains knowledge or content they're going to be learning in this unit, or it could be that they're working on a computer program and there's a pre-assessment that kind of shows what their strengths are and where their gaps are. But a formal assessment is a student sitting down and you're purposely assessing for what their knowledge is for this particular unit of study. You can also do an informal assessment. An informal assessment is just you sit down and you talk with students or have a discussion with them, or bring up things and ask them questions and see how they respond to those. So this can be done very informally. It doesn't need to be necessarily a pencil to paper test. It could be a conversation that you have with a student before the bell rang, because they were sharing a program that they watched and they really enjoyed, and it taught them about what they're going to be learning about. So it doesn't have to be a formal process. It can be very informal as well. The third thing is the body of work of a student. So when you have a student, unless it's the very first day of school, you have built up knowledge of what the student is capable of and what the student can do through your interactions with them, through the work they've turned in, through just the day-to-day interaction with the student. And so, can you take this body of work to determine what the student is capable of? So you may have a unit later on space, but early on in the year, whenever you would bring up the topic of space in your class, the student would just be really excited and share a wealth of knowledge. And from any time that you bring up space, the student is on board. So the student probably knows a lot about that. So you can use that body of work. Or it could be that you have, especially if you're teaching ELA, you have things that will overlap with one another. So if a student has shown a strong propensity for using grammar throughout the year, and then you have a unit on grammar, well, do you need to make them sit there and do the tedious work that maybe other students would have to do to memorize, those grammar rules that this student already possesses? I'd like to show you what a formal pre-assessment could look like. So here's an example of one that you would give before you even start a unit. You ask the student certain questions, as you can see, like if all squares are rectangles, and then they would mark what their knowledge base would be. Or number 4, which is all figures that have 4 sides with the same length are squares. Do you agree or disagree? And by doing this, you are getting a good idea of what this student knows about what they're going to be learning about. And if the student shows that they know quite a bit about it, or they have a really good understanding already of it, then you need to adjust your teaching. And this may be by coming up with ways to challenge them more, or to think about different ways they can approach it. But they should not be going through the basic lesson that students who do not have that understanding should be going through. Pre-assessments do not have to be just at the beginning of a unit of learning. It could be at the very beginning of the year. So here's an example of a kindergarten pre-assessment that the teacher gave, where she wanted to see what colors the students knew, what shapes, what letters, and then this gives this teacher an outlook on the year for what this student is capable of, and what the expectation should be for this student, and how to make sure that this student is learning at the level that they're able to handle. So you could give a pre-assessment at the very beginning of the year that covers a lot of the concepts that you're going to be covering that year, whether it be content or skills or whatever. And then how students answer these pre-assessment questions at the beginning of the year will inform the way that you will work with them throughout the year. Some schools use computer programs such as iReady to do pre-assessment. So they do a diagnostic with students before they're going to start something. So the computer kind of disseminates the data and lets you know where gaps are, or where they're high in some areas and low in other areas. So this pre-assessment can be used not just for the purposes of making sure that the student closes gaps that they have, but if it shows that they have a good understanding of something, then it informs the teacher that they need to be doing something with them that's going to challenge them. What you see here is just a graphic organizer that a teacher could use to go through these iReady goals to try to determine the kind of the blueprint of how they're going to teach the student. Another example of a pre-assessment is a free writing assessment. So basically, what this is you throw out a main concept or a main learning objective that you want students to learn during this, or to show that they know about, and you just simply ask them the entire thing. So, for example, that you see here, this encourages students to either sentences, list, graphic organize, or doodles to answer a prompt about ancient Egypt. So, what do they know about ancient Egypt? So if you look at this and a kid has not put very much, or knows very little, and or has some misconceptions about Egypt, then you need to start at the beginning with them and give them the basics. But if a kid shows you that they know a lot about ancient Egypt, that they know about King Tut's tomb, that they know about the different kingdoms of Egypt, and the different a lot about how pyramids were structured and where they're located, then this is a student that you're going to have to handle differently. And this pre-assessment indicates that. So and because it's called free writing, kids have they're not being graded on this. There's just free reign to show you what they know, and then use the teacher. It's your job to go and discern what they know, and then meet their needs accordingly. What you see here is a more creative way that you can pre-assess students. So, in this case, you give them a picture of Henry Ford standing in front of his Model T, and you throw out a question of what do they know about Henry Ford and what do they know about the Model T, and then they respond to that. And you can see this was done online. So, students, this might have been a homework assignment, or it might have been posted by the teacher, and students went online and then gave their answers. And then what's going to give you a good idea of how much they know about this particular topic, how in depth you need to go, how much you need to cover, but it will give you a really good idea of where students are at and where you can take students. What you see here is an example of an informal pre-assessment. So an informal pre-assessment means you're just collecting information in informal manner. So what you see here is a KWL chart. This is what students know, what they want to know, and what they want to learn. And if you start a discussion with students and you ask them what they know about a certain subject, and they give you some examples of that, you're going to get varying degrees of explanations of what they know and various levels of what they're aware of. Also, in what they want to know is going to give you an indication of how deep the student can go. So if the student says, "I just want to know the basics," or if I want to know, how this works in regard to something else, and they're making connections already, then what you're seeing is that students, the capability of these students for this particular topic. And keep in mind, different students will have different responses for different units. So what I mean by that is, so you have a kid who's very bright and they know a lot about a particular unit, but they may get to another unit and not know much at all. So pre-assessment is really important to do consistently and throughout the year to really see where kids are. Here is another example of an informal assessment where it's called squaring off, and what you would do is you would place a card in each corner of the room, which would have the varying degrees of understanding. So whether it's rarely ever, or whether they have it, or whatever. And so you put those in the corners, and then you tell the students to go. You list off something, or you explain something that they're going to be learning, and you ask them to go to certain corners based upon what they feel their level of understanding of this is. And again, what this is going to do is organically create groups for you, groupings for you for what students should be working together, because they're going to be able to work at a different pace than maybe another group. So if you have a bunch of kids over at the Rarely Ever, then you're going to have to start maybe at the beginning and build the foundation for that. But if you have a kids that really have it, then you're going to start where they are currently and have them move forward from there. Another informal pre-assessment would be teacher observation. So as the teacher, you see your kids day in and day out all year long, and you learn a lot about your students. It doesn't take long to learn much about them, but after a little while, you have learned quite a bit about your students. So one thing that you can do is just record your observations of what you see from students. You can see the student observation form here gives a place for areas of strength. So if the teacher sees areas of strength, they're going to mark boxes in there. If they see barriers to success, they are going to mark boxes in there. And then what you do is, if you see a lot of areas of strength, what you do is you try to design lessons or create learning objectives that are going to play into that area of strength. So, that would be something that you could do with a gifted kid. It's that you notice that they're very good at public speaking, would be an area of strength possibly. Then you would want to give them the opportunity to publicly speak as much as possible to develop and continue making that a strength. And so that would be an example of a teacher observation informal pre-assessment. Yet another informal pre-assessment is using students' own ability to rate themselves to determine where a student is at. So an example would be this fist to five. So if you ask about a certain content area and you ask students to give a 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5, depending on how comfortable they feel with that. A 5 being that they can explain it to someone else, that they have a really good understanding of that. A 1 being they don't understand at all, meaning that you would have to start from the beginning with them. Now, this of course has some bias in that students are rating themselves, and some students may not be the best at rating themselves. They may think they know a lot when they don't know as much as they think, or they might think they don't know anything when they know more. So, as the teacher, you do have to take this with a grain of salt, but it does give you an idea of the confidence of students and also quite possibly what their ability is. So if you have, you're going to do an activity and you ask them to put their hands up and 6 people put up a 5, then you want to group those 6 together for that part of the lesson. I mean, and if you see that you have like 8 of the 1s, then these may be students you need to pay a little more attention to, have individual conversations with them about what it is that they're learning. This last example of an informal pre-assessment is one of my favorites, which is just having a conversation with a student. It could be, they come in from the weekend and you ask them a question and they say something interesting that they did and you pursue that. So the reason why I like this is you really get to know your students. And the other reason why I like it is I feel like in a 5 to 10 minute conversation, I can really determine whether students get it or not. So when we're learning about something, I may go in and go around the room and sit down with students and ask them how things are going or what their understanding of that is. And some students will demonstrate that they've grasped it quite well, and other students will show me that they don't have a clue, and so they need a little remediation with that. But the students that are showing that they have a great grasp of it, I want to be able to give them something to do that is going to challenge them. So we've talked about formal pre-assessment, we've talked about informal pre-assessment. The other form of pre-assessment that you can do is the body of work. And what I mean by that is students create a body of work over the course of many years in school. And you can turn to this body of work to determine how adept they are at doing something or how much they know about something. So here's an excellent example, this reading interest survey that a teacher could give at the very beginning of the year. And what they're asking the student to do is to evaluate how good of a reader they have been throughout their years in school. So you could give this to 3rd graders, you could give this to 11th graders. But what you're going to see from this interest survey is how much students love to read, what level of reading that they're doing. And then you can, pick accordingly the books that you're going to assign to them or the books that you're going to work with them based upon this body of work of what they've done in the past. So it's a good way, an interest survey is a good way to see what students think of their own ability, and it gives you an idea of what they're capable of. Another body of work example that you could use would be their actual report card. So what you see here is a standards-based report card where they're taking a look at whether a kid has consistently applies and generalizes skills and strategies, so they really get it, or down to a 1 where they struggle with the strategies. And so from this standards-based report card, you could determine, how much a student is getting something or how quickly they get something or where they need help or where their strengths are. You could use regular report cards as well, but, usually a regular report card does not break it down like this one. So if you look in like the language arts here, it breaks it down into several different categories rather than just giving them one overall language arts grade. Same thing with the mathematics. There are lots of possibilities there. So this is an example of a standards-based report card. If you have a regular report card, that works too. But what you're doing is you're looking at. So if you're working with a student in the third 9 weeks, and you have the first 9 weeks, they've developed habits or shown you what they're capable of, then you would want to use that body of work to determine how you're going to move forward with that student. Another body of work that you can use is student homework. I'm not a huge proponent of homework. I don't like to give it just for the sake of giving it. I like to give it because students are practicing something or they're exploring something. And so what you could do with your homework is give kids like a pre-writing activity, and they could do that for homework. And that would give you, a body of work over a period of time to show what their writing abilities are. For mathematics, you could give them most difficult first, where students are given the 5 most difficult problems first, And if they do really well on those, then you realize that they really get this. If they struggle with those first 5 problems, then maybe they need to break it down a little bit more, work on it. So homework, I'm never a fan of using homework as a grade, but you can definitely use homework as a pre-assessment and to figure out what a student is capable of, and what they need. Another pre-assessment that you can use using body of work is, what have they done in past years, not just in the year that they're with you, but in the past years. This does require some vertical alignment. So in other words, if you are teaching 6th grade, are you talking to the 5th grade teacher to see what your students are capable of? You could even go back, down to their 3rd or 4th grade teachers to get an idea of their body of work and what they're capable of. Because teachers, they've worked with them for a year as well, and so they have a good understanding what the student can and cannot do, and they'll be able to fill you in a little bit on what this might look like. And so this does require some footwork in that you have to go talk to other teachers, but this should be done anyways because you want to get a good idea of where your students are, and what their strengths are. The last example of body work that you might use to pre-assess students is the state test. So students have created a body of work over their years of school. So if you have a kid who is in the 9th grade, they've taken the state test, 7 times. And you can use that body of work to show patterns and to show, if they're understanding something or if they're growing as a student. And so you can look at past data, past information from the state test to see what students' strengths are and what they really get. And so this collectively gives you a picture of what that student is going to be able to do possibly in the future as well. And it shows you where you can challenge students and where you may have to work with students. So hopefully now you have a decent understanding of what pre-assessment is. But more importantly is, how do you use this? So what do you do once you've assessed the student and you have come to the assessment that this student knows quite a bit? That's what we're going to be talking about in the next Todd Talk, is what are options for students once they have shown that they know this work, other than making them go through it with the other students? And are there things that you can do to challenge the student, to deepen their understanding of it, and just to make them a better learner overall?